Prey 2022. Prey is the newest installment in the Predator franchise, this one taking place in 18th century America and sitting as a prequel film to the 5D franchise, not counting the two Alien vs. Predator flicks. While I've seen all the films in this franchise, I wouldn't exactly call myself a fan, more of a glutton for disappointment at this point. Anyway, I barely remember enjoying the original two, even though I haven't watched them since the early 90s, but I remember watching and disliking the most recent one, The Predator, from 2018, because it was terrible. And somewhere between those movies, there is another one. I know, because I had to look at IMDb to make sure, which is funny because I honestly don't even remember Predators from 2010, even though looking at the poster, I know for a fact that I saw it in theaters. I remember who I went with, what theater it was at, even where I parked for some reason, but the entire movie itself just escapes me. I do remember getting mad that a family brought a stroller into a late-night showing of an R-rated Predator film, but that's the only memory I have from inside that theater. So, take from that what you will. Anyways, Prey is the first non-theatrical release in the franchise, as it's a straight-to-Hulu affair, and it's R-rated, so at least there's that. It's also not in a theater, so no strollers for this R-rated fare. Yay! The movie revolves around a predator hunting predators, starting with a snake, a wolf, a bear, and finally people. We watch as an animal predator hunts prey, only for the alien predator to turn that predator animal into prey, and we watch it over and over again, and have it explained later, to really make sure you don't miss the point of this film. In case you're not getting it, this predator is making other predators its prey, because the movie's called Prey. Get it? It's about preying on prey by making predators the prey of a predator. We can go over it again in the comments in case you're confused. Now the lead, who I think had a name, is a generic strong female character who wants to be a hunter instead of a gatherer in her Comanche tribe, and she practices sharpening and throwing her tomahawk in order to be a better hunter, and nobody in her tribe really seems to care. There are only two pieces of evidence that anybody has an issue with her dream of being the bestest best hunter who ever hunted, and one is when her mother tells her that she was given her tomahawk to dig roots, not hunt, which is a conversation that isn't really contentious and goes nowhere. There's no reprimand or threats, it just comes off almost like a passing point of fact. The one other time is when a hunting party gives her grief for wanting to come along, which plays more to their annoyance that she's trying to be a hunter without giving reasons. It's not really obvious sexism or rules that drive a wannabe alpha hunter to dislike her, more that he wants to be in charge. We see this later when he's disappointed that he didn't become war chief. Weirdly, I have no frame of reference to know if the Comanche should care or not about our lead wanting to be a hunter, but I guess I'm supposed to assume that they'd be against it even though they don't really show it? Were they a patriarchal society, or would they have been cool with this chick doing whatever she wants? I don't know, and this movie certainly doesn't clue us in either. It's a mixed bag at best. The real alpha hunter, her brother, accepts her skills and largely supports her, going so far as to try to pass on lessons, which she doesn't learn because she can't be bothered to listen to advice from a skilled person in the craft she wants. And he likewise encourages her by not only affirming her skills to the hunting party, especially her keen tracking, but also following her plan to take down a lion that's attacked one of the tribe. Her plan sort of succeeds despite losing one member of the party and her getting knocked out. Her brother has to carry her back to the tribe and finishes the job of killing the lion, taking credit for the kill even though it was really her plan and she heard it, but ultimately he did finish the job, or she couldn't bring it home, as he says. This kill makes him the war chief of the tribe, to the joy of most and the annoyance of her and wannabe alpha hunter. So the next morning she takes off and has to be tracked down by her tribe, even though nobody seemed to care that she was walking away, and when they find her, she tells them that she saw something bigger than a bear, and wannabe alpha laughs, saying that she saw something from a children's story. This is pretty weak. What children's story? Is there evidence that the predators are coming to Earth regularly? This is the illusion of universe building without the actual effort. Anyways, the hunting party just wants none of it and are tired of her just running off, so they opt to knock her out and tie her hands so they can force her to come back to camp. While returning, they're stalked and attacked by the predator, who sees their weapons and makes short work of them. She's the only one to survive, and despite the predator chasing her through a field and seemingly about to kill her, it changes its mind when she gets snared in a bear trap. I guess because now she's prey? Does this thing stop killing predators when they become prey? Well, in this scene it does, apparently. And this is when our hero is captured by some French trappers who we hear coming immediately, but the predator just ignores. Why? No idea. This unstoppable killing machine has been attacking things sort of willy-nilly up until this point, and targets anything resembling a fellow predator or anything with a weapon until the French show up, at which point it just decides to piss off until they have time to regroup. This is a what the shit moment. And this scene sets up another example of people knowing a predator exists, I guess because they found the bodies of her hunting party mauled and some glowing green blood, while not really defining how or why these French trappers want to take it down. We also find out that they captured her brother, for reasons also unexplained. And maybe Hulu didn't like me, but the lack of subtitles for the Frenchies annoyed me, as the motives are left implied but not explained visually or in dialogue for what they're doing and why. They want to kill the unknown monster because, and we're left to assume there's a reason behind that because. Just go with it, I guess. The Frenchies set a trap for the Predator using our protagonist and her brother as bait, and it goes terribly for the Frenchmen as the Predator goes through them like Batman through low-level henchmen, and then the Predator ignores our heroes because they're being used as bait, or prey. Get it? All of that setup was really for this scene. Well, mostly. So brother goes to get some horses, and sister goes to retrieve her dog back at the camp of our mostly deceased French friends. She saves her dog, manages to overpower a few Frenchies twice her size, and then treats the wound of a trapper/translator in exchange for a single verbal lesson on how to load an 18th century flintlock pistol. A pistol that is only in this film because it was in Predator 2. Despite being new technology to her, she takes the verbal lesson perfectly because it's all the fine details you need to properly load such a weapon, such as not too much and not too little powder. I can't figure out what Grandma meant when she said a pinch of salt and a heaping serving of something, but not too much and not too little is enough information to use a foreign firearm? Sure, okay, why not? While giving medical aid to the translator, our heroine gives him an orange flower to lower his body temperature, to slow his blood loss, which, to be fair, was set up earlier in the movie, but when the Predator shows up at the camp, the thermal scan it uses still shows his trail of blood and his body as having some temperature, and it reads something, in Predatorese on the HUD display, which I guess we're to assume means dead or something, because translations are hard to put on screen. The Predator is about to leave him be until it steps on him and he screams, at which point it kills the dude who was terribly injured. So it left her alone when she got caught in a bear trap, but it felt the need to finish this dude off despite him missing a leg. Interesting choice. So War Chief's brother then shows back up into the camp and does some serious damage to the Predator, in the process knocking its helmet off. The helmet that contains the famous 3-dot targeting system, and our hero watches the Predator miss 3 shots of its ranged bolt weapon. The Predator then takes out War Chief's brother while she escapes and sets some traps for the big finale. This is where things really go off the rails, as the ending was forced and just patently ridiculous. It starts with our hero somehow dragging a surviving Frenchman, who looks to weigh 250 plus pounds, into the woods to lay a trap for the Predator. I guess I should mention that this is where she explains to the French guy who doesn't speak her language, so really to us the audience, that she's doing this because he doesn't see her as a hunter or dangerous, and it won't either. Get it? It won't see her, because this movie is about turning predators into prey. This is the other scene, paying off all that redundant buildup from earlier. Her plan involves giving Frenchie his rifle and taking the orange flower to lower her body temperature, only this time, the Predator can't see her or the pistol she's carrying at all, even though it saw the other dude under the effects of the same herb, and when the Predator takes out the French dude, she shoots its helmet off to get the targeting system. Back when the Predator was off licking its wounds and she was setting the trap with Fat Frenchie, she also set a few traps in the woods, kinda Home Alone style, and so when the Predator comes after her, because now she isn't prey anymore, she manages to hold her own using the Predator's own tactics against it. At first by getting it to cut off its own arm, and then by using its weapons against it. At one point, her dog attacks right before she gets smited by the Predator's javelin-type staff weapon, and she uses this weapon to inflict some damage of her own. Then in one of the funniest parts, the Predator body slams to the ground, but before it can use its bladed shield to offer, she uses leverage against nothing out of nowhere to scoot herself up into a position to get her head between some rocks to literally save her neck. Now as a quick aside, we watched this Predator deadlift a bear earlier, and you want us to believe a chick who's 90 pounds soaking wet can survive that body slam, let alone has the strength to force her body up along the ground while in a chokehold by this thing? No. Just no. No! Now when all looks lost and the shield blade is mere millimeters from her neck, she rips out one of the Predator's own fangs and stabs it in the head. I'd like to imagine that this bone protrusion wouldn't be that easy to rip out, but we just established this chick has superhuman strength, so who knows. When it screams, she somehow moves her head just before the shield blade, the weapon that was millimeters from her neck a second ago, stabs down all the way into the rocks where it should have beheaded her. A gap magically exists now that didn't one shot earlier, because reasons. And no, the Predator didn't lift the shield. If the Predator had lifted this thing up, I'd let this pass, but she moved her head out from under this blade despite it not moving. And before some nerd goes all actually on me, I've watched this scene half a dozen times to make sure this nerd point isn't misplaced. But the creme de la creme, the chef's kiss, is when she manages to kill the Predator by getting it to shoot itself in the head by idiotically firing laser-guided darts without knowing where the guidance system was or was aiming. That's right. She set a trap in what looks like a bog that she herself fell into earlier, and aimed the helmet into the perfect position in case the Predator managed to not kill her until this final stage of her plan. Obviously, it doesn't kill her. She's the hero, and it gets stuck in the mud, so it decides, I guess, to throw caution to the wind and fire its laser-guided weapon just willy-nilly. We, and I assume the Predator, know that without the targeting system, these darts will miss, because we watched that happen back in the trapper camp when it missed her dog. It can't hit her right now because these darts can change direction and will change direction to acquire the target being aimed at, and therefore, without its helmet, these won't hit her. I guess the Predator just forgot. It just forgot because it's tired and it doesn't know how its own weapons work. This quite literally is the only explanation I can come up with to explain its course of action in this scene. So the darts are let loose, and lo and behold, the 3-dot targeting system just so happens to be aiming perfectly at the Predator's own head, because Hunter Girl set the perfect trap. Literally perfect, within a few inch margin of error perfect. It couldn't have been placed more perfectly with the Predator's help. And of course this was predictable from the moment she took the helmet, and I'm glad I was watching this home because I think I gave out an audible groan. This thing is strong and can move in the bog. It can duck. It can weave. It's not like she could have planned exactly where it fell, where it stood, or how tall it was for this aim to be so perfect. This may be nitpicky to some, but for this shot to be this perfect requires an unfathomable level of luck. But because she's been so sure of herself the whole movie, it plays like she planned it out, which would have been impossible. And it speaks of the lack of a character arc, because she's not surprised that it worked at all. Now cut to her walking back to her tribe, throwing the Predator's head at her father's feet, and her triumphantly being made the new war chief because she's the greatest hunter that ever hunted. The credits roll and we see the whole movie as we just watched play out in the credits, which is pretty common these days, and then finally, towards the end of this credit crawl that's also the replay of the movie, and after the recreation of the last live scene we saw, we see more ships coming down to Earth. This explains, or alludes to, I guess, how the Flintlock ended up back in the possession of the Predators for Predator 2. But who knows? Overall, I didn't hate this movie because I didn't care about the franchise and I expected much worse, like Terminator Dark Fate worse, but I don't consider not meeting or going below an extremely low bar for quality these days much of anything to write home about. The characters largely were one-dimensional, with the notable exception of the war chief brother, and the premise, while paper-thin and somewhat interesting on its surface, was hammered home so hard that I lost interest halfway through the movie. The undertones of a girl power premise of a strong female character who wants to bend gender roles rests on people assuming that the Comanche had the same socio-political beliefs as 2022 America, which just seems odd, especially since we aren't given evidence of that being the case, one way or the other. As jaded as so many of us have become about filmmakers making bad products while trading on nostalgia bait and then blaming the fans of their IP for not being fans of their lame offerings, this movie didn't really lean that hard explicitly into the field of woke. All of the elements were there, an overpowered female protagonist who needs little training and has no character arc, perfect circumstances that only she can figure out, etc. But I think a lot of people, myself included, were shocked that this movie didn't just outright insult us at every turn. There's almost nothing to the story and a lot that doesn't make sense or isn't really explained, which is probably the biggest failing coming out of this movie. I expected a contrived ending, which is what we got, because the ending only works with a Predator who gets stupider and weaker the more he fights our hero, and the ending relies on the perfect execution of a somewhat ridiculous plan. Had she tried to use the targeting system and missed, it might not have bothered me so much, but all in all, it felt lazy. There were a lot of establishing shots that looked nice, and while redundant, the setup was clever enough where it explained better, but I think a lot of people really like this movie and are rating it better than it deserves because of how much they hated the last movie in the franchise. I want to say I didn't like or dislike this movie, and my impulse was to give it a solid 3 of 5, or a meh rating, but the more I think about it, the less I enjoy it. Therefore, it gets a 2 of 5. You don't get points simply because you aren't as trash as I expected. No sir, I didn't like it. Cheers.